I love the challenge. I love going up against the best players. I don't care who it is. I don't care about getting embarrassed. I don't care. Kyrie Irving, none of those guys scare me. I know some players in the NBA probably get butterflies before the game, but not me. I'm licking my lips. I come excited. They need to prepare for me at the end of the day. That's how I think.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Fantrax and Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and you can find me on Twitter, of course, at redrock_bball. Today's podcast, as all of the podcasts are, is brought to you by Fantrax. It is the best place to host your fantasy league, whether that's fantasy basketball, it might be fantasy football, it might be fantasy hockey, it might be fantasy soccer, it might be whatever. But we're obviously talking about fantasy basketball here, so go on to Fantrax. You can do everything you want on Fantrax. You can have minor league squads, you can do three-way trades, you can have salaries and contracts and future draft pick trading, which you can't do on any of the other sites. Any of you who are diehard Yahoo people would have been extraordinarily frustrated, I'm sure, when the Yahoo information came out at the start or at the end of last week. They opened their site. The rankings were absolutely abominable. I saw people defending them, saying, "Oh, of course they're not finished." That's fine. Why release them then? And the thing is that they were done, because if they were just a rehash of last year's rankings, which some people were suggesting, then Karl-Anthony Towns wouldn't have been sitting at 13, because he didn't come into last season ranked 13th. So the fact that those rankings were just so way off just shows that there's very little attention paid to fantasy basketball over there. The mock drafts don't work. I still can't get into them. The rankings are way off. Now, I'm not just saying this because Fantrax is a sponsor of the show, but it was really bad, those rankings. DeMarcus Cousins was at 41. Eric Bledsoe and Blake Griffin were both outside the top 100. Klay Thompson was ranked 8th, I think, from memory. Just stuff that didn't make a huge amount of sense. Now, they will get it fixed, I'm sure, but there's still always going to be discrepancies, and there's always going to be odd things. ESPN's got Trey Lyles ranked in the 60s. That's ridiculous. There are always going to be things like that, but the lack of care showed on Yahoo with LeBron not having a rank whatsoever is it's pretty poor. They will get it fixed, but if you're going to release something, if you're going to tell people you're going to release something on a certain day, you do it correctly, and you make sure that the mock drafts actually work, and you make sure that the rankings, while there's always opinion based in them, there is no opinion that can say, I think Blake Griffin's the 141st best player. There is no opinion that can make that make sense. It's just not. You could say he's the 41st best player, and I'd go, yeah, I'd probably have him a bit higher, but that's not bad. But you cannot say that I'd take 140 players ahead of Blake Griffin, because that means that you don't pay attention to basketball whatsoever. Now that intro's out of the way, which, by the way, was a promo for Fantrax, but I got a little bit sidetracked.
Let's get to it.
All right, now I want to carry on with that theme today. We're going to answer your questions at the end of the show as well today, but I want to carry on with the theme of rankings and the difficulties with them, the folly with them, and the way that you should be using them or looking at them when we're heading into drafts. Now, you know that I work for Basketball Monster, and I've been working on these projections for Basketball Monster for the last month, solidly every day. We've been going through the projections. Kyle and Matt have been assisting me with them, but every day going through the projections, really looking at everyone and trying to get the numbers as accurate as what we think is going to happen at this point. Now, there are things that we don't know. Obviously, we don't know how everything's going to pan out, but we've made our best guesses at how people are going to fit in new systems, new teammates, new rotations, playing time, all that sort of stuff. On the 1st of September, Basketball Monster will be opening for memberships for next season. And then when that happens, you can get in there, get your membership done, and check out our projections and all our tools, our draft tracker, which is absolutely the best way that you need to be approaching a draft. And that's what I want to be talking about in today's podcast, is approaching a draft. You'll hear people all the time. It's the most common standard fantasy question, or it's one of them, the trade ones and waiver wires. But at this point of the season, it's rank. Rank these 3 players. Can you rank these guys for me? Can you give me your ranks of players? Who's got good ranks? I know I've said ranks too many times now that it doesn't sound like a word anymore, but I think you understand what I'm getting at. Never, never, never draft based on a ranking. Don't go, I've got this, whatever side it is. I've got their top 200 ranks. I'm going to go off that and I'm going to draft off it. The top 50 guys are gone. It's my pick. Who's at 51? Let's pick this guy. It's not how any of this works. There is literally no one-size-fits-all ranking system unless you're in a points league. And then that is because you're basing it on one category, points. And then you can say, who's going to get more points? Let's draft that guy next. That makes a lot of sense. That's the way you do it. In a categories league, in a rotisserie league, rankings are pointless. Now, we at Basketball Monster, obviously, we do projections, and then that turns into rankings. Now, rankings are a great way of seeing things once stuff has happened, who's ranked number one at the moment, but projecting for ranks and using those ranks for drafting, it's not going to work. Now, we do projections, and like I said, that turns it into ranks, but it's not intended to be that the guy that comes out 23rd is the guy that gets picked 23rd. That's just not how it's supposed to turn out. And I'll tell you why. Because you don't know who you've picked first. You don't know what your punt strategy is. You don't know what other positions are available. And that's why the draft tracker on Basketball Monster is a huge help, because it gives you your value based on positions. When you see them, you'll see that shooting guards, they're harder to come by with good stats, so they get a positional value that's higher. There's dynamic value as well, depending on what stats have come off the board already in the draft. And it tells you know what? This guy's value is going way up because all the high free throw percentage, high volume guys have gone. And if you want to get free throw percentage and build it up, you're going to have to grab this guy because there's not many other of those players left. And that might be a guy like DeMar DeRozan who might be on a ranking, and I'm using air quotes here, on a ranking at 50, but you might be sitting at 40 and go, oh, look at my free throws, that's 76. I'm stuffed. If I don't get DeRozan and his 8 attempts a game and 84%, then I'm never going to be competitive in free throws. So if you want to be competitive, you got to go ahead and grab a guy like that, because those numbers start coming off the board. Oh, I need some scoring. Well, there's like 2 20-point scorers left. I might not need to get these guys higher. And that's why, when I talk about rankings, that they don't mean anything. For the first few picks, absolutely. But when you see our projections come out, you see, and I tweeted this out yesterday, the difference between the guy ranked 6th and the guy ranked 12th is 0.09 in terms of standard score value. So really small amount. The difference between the guy ranked 5 and 6 is greater than the difference between 6 and 12. So once you get past those first 5 picks, pick whoever you want. Really, there's a big... Those guys are just all pushed together in terms of their overall value, but their value is spread in many different categories. Do you want a big rebounder here? Hey, assists are harder to get. Maybe you're getting an assists guy here is a better option. Shot blocking, that's tough to get. Maybe that pushes a shot blocker up higher in that area. But it's not as simple as going, oh, you've got Karl Anthony Towns and ranked ahead of LeBron James. Should I pick him there? Well, it depends. It depends on what you want to do. It depends on how you want to approach your team. Do you want to go big, or would you put Chris Paul ahead of those guys? Because their numbers in terms of overall just total value comes out the same, but that's never the way you want to approach it. I'm happy looking at ranks for the first few picks, but after that, it all comes down to me pairing and building your team. And I've said this millions of times on this podcast. It's not about getting the best player. It's about building the best team. So you might have a guy that, this guy looks like a better player, but if he doesn't do anything to actually help your team win, what's the point of it? And people will say grab him and trade him later, but in my experience, that really doesn't work out in your favor. Either you don't get the sort of value that you want back for him, or you don't get the sort of player that you want back for him. And in general, not all the time, probably 75% of the time, it doesn't work out in your favor just grabbing a player because he's there, unless you're talking the last couple of rounds. It doesn't generally work in your favor grabbing a guy who doesn't do anything to your team in the early rounds and then hope to trade him. That to me is not a great scenario. It's not a great theory. In the last couple of rounds, absolutely, you can do that. Grab a guy. Hey, he probably should have gone in the 70s and he's sitting around at 110. I'll grab him and I'll see what I can do from there. But early on, I don't believe in those sort of moves to grab someone just because he's there and then hope you can trade it, because in my experience, you never get the sort of value back that you want. And the reason that he started to slide is because other people don't value him as highly. So the fact that he's slid and then you've grabbed him, I'm going to trade him back to get great value off him. Well, if he had have had that great value in the first place, then the people that were drafting in front of you would have grabbed him. And they would have said, yeah, he looks like value for me, let's get him. So, and this happens a lot. Like, you'll do a draft, and straight after a draft, someone will offer you a trade, or in the middle of a draft, and I'll go, why would I trade for that guy when I could have just picked him myself? You wait for some games to play out. So I don't like that strategy at the top end. I think that was actually a question that was going to be asked in this pod as well. But I don't like that strategy in drafts. I like building a team, and building a team that makes sense through those first few rounds especially. So when we release our projections, I don't want you to look at them as rankings and go, okay, you've got this guy at 31. I think he's more at 35. It doesn't matter. As I mentioned, the gap between these guys is so squished up. Between 7 and 12, you're talking 0.06 in value. It's not a big gap. Between 24 and 36, you're talking about 0.19. The difference between number 1 and number 3 is 0.35. So that's how big that gap is there, whereas all the other guys are squished up. And as you get further into the draft, each round of value is like 0.06. So it's like half a round's value at the first in the first round. I hope all that makes sense. There's lots when you get to these middle rounds. I've got pick 60. The guy I want's at pick 72. Doesn't matter. Just get him. Just get the guy who you want and who fits what you want to do, because you're going to have a mixture of bigs and wings and point guards to get assists. You have shot blockers. You're going to have bad free throw guys, bad field goal guys. Which guy? Don't be afraid to let a guy. He had an ADP of 50 and we're at pick 65. Don't be afraid to let him slide if he doesn't help your team. And that's especially true in a rotisserie situation. You get to pick 80 and then Andre Drummond's there, and you go, Andre Drummond's still there at pick 80. Cool, let's grab him. Well, you just lost yourself the league. Despite it being great value, you've just torpedoed a category. Now, there is something to be said about, say you're at that spot at number 8, which you can look at on the draft tracker as well. Where's your free throw percentage sitting in comparison to the league? If you're sitting at like 76% and you are the last place team in free throws already without actually getting a bad free throw shot or punting the free throws, if you're already last, someone has to get a 1. Then by all means, grab Drummond, because once you get to the last spot in 1 point, you can't get less than that. So do it. But if you're in that middle range of guys, where if you're sitting at 78 and you're in the top 3 or 4 of Roto, don't grab a guy like Drummond and bump yourself down to a 1, because it's just going to make it really hard for you to win. But as I said, if you're in those mid to late rounds and you're comparing free throw percentage and you're sitting at, say, 74% and everyone else is at 76 or 77, then I'm actually okay with grabbing Drummond. Now, it's still going to be really hard to win, because you realistically in a Roto league need to have 9 or 10 points average across each category to win that league. And getting a 1 makes it harder across all the other 8 or 9 categories, or 7 or 8 categories that you're playing in. That means you've got to get like an extra 1 in each of those ones. So instead of finishing third in every category, you've got to finish second in every one, bar the one that you come last in. So it is tough. But if you're already coming last, and Drummond and Jordan and Howard and Capella and those guys have slipped down, you're in the 80s or 90s, and you're already last in free throws, grab it. And that's where I mean that rankings, you'll see plenty of rankings come out and they'll have DeAndre Jordan ranked at 40 and Drummond ranked at 30. And I'll look at it and go, what's the point of that? Because if you're in a head-to-head league and you're not punting, then you're not drafting these guys. They're not they're not your 30th best player. If you are punting it, then DeAndre Jordan's a top 10 guy. Andre Drummond's a top 15 guy. Dwight Howard's a top 20 player. But they're sitting at 40, 50, 60, 80. So no one should be drafting them at that point. And that means if people aren't aware of that, you can actually get them at that spot. And you might be in a punt free throw situation. You might be sitting in the 6th round and you might have DeAndre Jordan there, or Dwight Howard in the 8th round or something like that. And you can grab them, and that's tremendous value for you. But that's not how they should be ranked. And that's why rankings are really tough. Especially tough if you head into dynasty rankings, because they're impossible to do. Not only do you have, I don't know how you're building your team issue, I don't know what you're punting, I don't know what your team strategy is, but I don't know what your team goal is. Are you looking to win this year? Are you bottoming out? Are you building with young players? And that's why dynasty rankings are basically impossible. And you can go for, looking for a mix between win now and future, and that's bullshit, because a mix between win now and future means that you're finishing in the 8th seed and you're doing nothing. You need to have clear strategy. That's why dynasty ranks are you don't see very many of them, because they're just how are you viewing them? How are you know, what I could do it and say this is a dynasty rank for 3 years time, and here is one for win now, which is basically the same as what season long projections are. But to try and blend them all into one list, it doesn't work out. Same as just a basic ranking list for a draft. Don't print out ESPN's top 200 or Yahoo's top 200 or any site's top 200 and take that to your draft and tick off when each guy goes and just go down the list, because you will I guarantee you will lose. If you draft based like that, you will not win your league. There is no chance that you can do that. And you'll see, because that's, if you're in a league where a guy's auto drafting, that's basically how they draft their team. They don't win their league. And I'm 100% sure, 99% sure that everyone listening to this podcast doesn't draft like that they don't go through and just go, here is my list. But if you're at pick 60 and there's a guy, I really want this guy, he's at pick 80, maybe he doesn't get back to me, fine, make the move. It's not a terrible decision to reach a round or two ahead, because as I said, the difference between these guys, between a guy at 50 and a guy at 70, is the same distance between a guy at 1 and 3. Not 1 and 3 rounds, like pick 1 and pick 3. That's how close everyone remains in these back ends, and with so much room, especially in that back end for movement, for increased roll, decreased roll, bump up in performances, regression, then it's just, hey, this is a guy whose overall shape of his stat line fits what I want to do. Let me get him and let me make that decision to move. So again, when Basketball Monster opens and you join up with a membership, don't look at the projections as rankings. You don't look at them and say, well, you've got this player, you've got Dennis Schroeder ranked above, give a name, who's it? Dirk Nowitzki. Yeah, maybe we do, maybe we don't. But what do you want? Do you want high efficiency scoring? Do you want assists and steals? But are happy to forego efficiency, because that makes a difference as to which one you want. And on your person, that's why we've got that punting set up with the toggles. You turn the punts on. And when you do that, that gives you a better idea of what the ranking should be for your league. But even then, in a punt situation, putting that onto the rankings, that's not necessarily telling you the order in which to draft guys, because you still need to sometimes go out of order. And especially say you're punting in a punt free throw situation, there'll be most of your point guards, and you get a fair bit of value from free throw percentage. But if you just go on that list where you do punt free throws, you'll see point guards 20, 30 spots below the ADP, and you'll never get a point guard. So you won't contribute in assists and you won't contribute in steals. So what you've got to look at is getting a guy who is going to get you assists, taking them around their ADP, even though it doesn't necessarily marry up with the way that the punt situation is set up, because there would just be so many bigs that have jumped in front of them. And that's what I mean about preparing your draft in advance as well. These are the point guards whose value is not mainly contributed by free throw percentage. They're still going to be good free throw percentage guys, but it's not their number one category. These are the guys that I want to target, and I'm going to have to go, spend more than the dollar recommended budget to get them, because I need assists, I need to get steals, I need to get 3-pointers, and all those things are generally tied to free throw percentage. So you'll need to get those guys, and you might have to go early on them just to get them, and then you'll see all of the other bigs and the poor free throw guys, really start to, the value will be that you can get them in round 8 when to you they're a round 3 type of player. That's an important point about punting, and some people may have tried to punt before and not understood that point and failed, and punting shit doesn't work for me. It's because it's not straightforward. It's not as simple as just let's turn the punt toggle on, let's just grab the guy, and you can, when you look at the draft tracker, you'll see the guy's value gets bumped up because stats start coming off the board. You need to make sure you're getting those stats from those players. I think I've explained that well enough. What I wanted to do in today's podcast is tie in ranks to turnovers. Now, every time that I reference a rank, I don't reference a 9-category rank. You're probably aware of this. All of the Red Rock listener leagues, the head-to-head listener leagues, are all 9-category leagues with turnovers as the 9th category. I was debating whether we go assist-to-turnover ratio, whether we split field goal percentage into 2-point percentage and 3-point percentage, but in the end, I just went with standard turnovers as a 9th category. That's fine as a tiebreaker. I absolutely despise ranking players using turnovers as a category. I despise using turnovers as something to really justify the draft position and draft value of guys as well. If I'm in a 9-category league, turnovers are automatically punted for me. And as I've said plenty of times, that doesn't mean that I'm deliberately trying to get all high turnover players. It means I just am not. I'm considering it as an 8-category league without turnovers, and then they become a tiebreaker. Why do you say that? People go, that's a great way of getting value for guys. I'm going to highlight some players here that I'll get to that in a sec. But what it is to me, say you're in a head-to-head matchup with someone, and you've focused on making turnovers a good category for you. Yes. So I've drafted well. I've drafted all these low turnover players. You play against someone who has 2 of their guys injured during the week. That means they're playing 5 less games than you, maybe. Depending on how they stream, they might have 5 less games than you. So therefore, that category that you had that was one of your strengths, maybe one of your 6 strong categories, is turnovers. That other team's just taken that off you because they've played 6 less games. So therefore, playing less games means less turnovers. They've taken that category off you. And the focus you've put into turnovers means that your focus has come off other categories. And you might not win them against a team who's set up in a certain manner. So you might have, in general, if you're paying a lot of attention to turnovers, that means your assists aren't that high. So you might be in a situation where someone you're playing against has got a lot of point guards, and then they sit some guys out. They've played less games, their turnovers come down, but they still beat you in assists. And that to me is a concern. On the other hand, it's fine to have turnovers, and people often use the argument, and I've heard, and I don't understand why they do, but I've heard people use the argument, but what if you suffer injuries? It's good to have a category that you can be competitive in that like turnovers, that you don't need volume to get it. That's fine. It is good to have that if you have an injury problem or if you've got a scheduling issue where you play less games. But if you play less games, your turnovers come down anyway. So if you come in and get 2 guys injured and less games for the week, 5 less games from the week, even if you didn't concentrate on turnovers, you might win that category anyway, or you should win that category anyway, just by playing 5 less games and getting 15 less turnovers, 12 less turnovers during the week. You should win that category anyway. So in a week where you haven't you've punted that category, but you've copped a down week, you still have a chance to actually get that category back against someone without making it something. And all those other categories that you've consolidated, you still, because you've got enough buffer there, you still might actually win those and get your turnovers down enough that you win that as well. Last year I went into a draft punted turnovers, as I always do, came out the other end of the draft, and my projection for my team was the second best team in turnovers. Didn't look to do that at all, didn't draft guys based on turnovers, and I ended up winning turnovers a lot of the time during the season, but that was not the way that I drafted. When I had less, I would win turnovers I would win turnovers when I had more games. I would win it when I had less games, but I also had all my other categories, or the ones that I was concentrating on. I think I had field goal percentage punted as well. All those were bumped up as well. I had lots of assists, lots of steals, lots of threes and points, all that sort of stuff. But the turnovers, if I got them, it was a bonus. If I didn't get them, it didn't matter to me. And why I want to bring this up again, it ties into Yahoo as well, because all their rankings are based on 9 category values. So people will look, but this guy is ranked at 38 on Yahoo. Now, a guy like Marvin Williams last season, he was ranked really highly on Yahoo, really highly, because of turnovers. And I just don't believe in using turnovers as a measure of a player's overall value. If 2 players are literally identical in what they're doing, and one person averages 2.5 turnovers and one averages 2 turnovers, then fine. Behind that completely. But when a player's value is predominantly made up of the turnover category, then I think that their ranking becomes fool's gold. And it becomes something where you might get suckered into grabbing that guy too early based on just a number and a rank that is next to their name. So what I'm going to do is go through the top 150 players last year in 9 category leagues and tell you the players that had as their number one category turnovers. And again, I say this all the time, and maybe it's just me being a bit of a dick, but the best way to get no turnovers is to not pick any player. That is your greatest contributor in the turnovers category is this person who doesn't play. So that's why I'm not paying attention mainly to that category. Because if someone's biggest contribution in their 9 category rank is from turnovers, then I could get someone to give a big contribution in that category just by not playing anybody. And it doesn't mean that these players have no value. It just means that their rank gets inflated by 10, 20, 30 spots because of a category that is a negative category, again, which if you didn't play anyone, you'd actually get a bigger return from them in that category. That might sound stupid to plenty of you, but it's just the way that I approach turnovers. Fine having them in there, despise them in a rotisserie format, fine in a head-to-head as a tiebreaker, but absolutely not something that I pay any attention to when looking at rankings. Let's go through it. Now, what I did is I went through the list of guys in the top 150 who had turnovers as their number one category. I also went through and had a look at the guys who had turnovers as their number 2 category. So there's some interesting names in that number 2 category portion as well. We want to start with the guys who had turnovers as their number 1 category, as their best contribution, and the poster child for that is Marvin Williams. If you had a look, he was inside the top 50 player last season. And I, for one, was, when I kept looking at what Marvin Williams was doing last season, it was, I felt like I didn't know what was happening. I felt like I didn't know basketball. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. He came out of nowhere. He hit threes out of his ass that he never would hit before. He started blocking shots. He was grabbing rebounds. He was scoring. He was doing everything that a high draft pick should do. It just took him 10 years to be able to do it. But when you look at Marvin Williams and go, okay, Marvin Williams is a top 10 guy. He's not a top 10 guy. Marvin Williams, he was a top 50 guy, and you look at him on Yahoo, and his rank, I think, was 30s or something like that. Like, it is bullshit. You would never, ever pick Marvin Williams there. The fact is, he averaged 0.8 turnovers. It was comfortably his best category. And by comfortably, I mean like almost double the next category, which was his three-pointers. You take that away, and you make him into an 8 category guy, then he drops 20 spots or 30 spots down to like the 80s or 90s, and he's nowhere near as valuable in that situation. It's no turnovers, definitely, but it is taking up such a big chunk of what his ranking is that if you're looking at those numbers in isolation without knowing that you might go, I need to get Marvin Williams at pick 30 or pick 40, and to me, it's just not the way that you should be approaching it. Toby Harris was a surprise one to me. Now, it was just his best category. I think it was 0.45, and the next category was 0.44. But still, he got a lot of value from the turnover category. He didn't turn it over really at all. So that's another reason. He was at 1.4 turnovers per game. It was really close. His free throw percentage was actually his second best category than his rebounds. They were all pretty close, but turnovers was still his number 1. I'm a big Toby Harris fan, but I think it might lead him to get a little bit overdrafted next season as well. Maybe not by too much, but it is a possibility when you look at that ranking and look at those turnovers that it is a bit of a concern. Otto Porter, another one of those guys. He was absolutely brutal through the stretch of January, February last season. But again, you look at his overall numbers for the season, and he comes in as a top 60 type of player. Now, he's 11.5 points, 5 rebounds, 1.3 threes, 1.6 assists, 1.4 steals. Is that top 50-ish? 47 and 75. It's pretty good, but 0.9 turnovers really, really bumps it up. And again, it's his most significant statistical contribution. You take that out, and you might see him dropping down to be a player that's ranked 80th or 85th or something along those lines. And it's a significant drop-off again, and you don't. If you're just looking at, he finished 60th last season, and if you're on your Yahoo site, which uses default 9-cat rankings, when you look at Porter and it will have his rank from last season and their preseason rank, whatever it is, you might be not necessarily fooled. That's maybe the wrong word, but you might say, yeah, he's a top 50 guy, and it comes from the fact that those turnovers were so low. Luol Deng was another player who had turnovers as his most productive category. I don't think many people are going to be really all that high on Luol Deng this season, but it is a possibility, and just remember that that is part of the reason there. Disappointed to say that my boy Gaz Harris, his best category was turnovers last season. I don't think that'll be the case this year. I think he gets his points, he gets his threes, and he gets his steals up this year. But his ranking, you might look at his stat line and go, that's not all that impressive. Why do people love him? And the number bumps up because of the turnovers. I think that will probably rectify itself this season. A couple of other players that found themselves in the top 150. Taj Gibson, he doesn't get any turnovers. There is zero chance you should be looking at Taj Gibson inside the top 150 this season. I want nothing to do with that. Cody Zeller and Al Jefferson, both of those guys. Now, I'm big on Cody Zeller this season. I think he takes a big step forward. I was obviously very down on Al Jefferson last season. So even with mentioning these things, or who's got turnovers as a number one category, there's nuance behind each player. It is not as simple as turnovers are your number one category, I don't like you, because I love Gary Harris. I love Cody Zeller. I think they're going to be big guys this season who take big steps forward, but it's got nothing to do with what I think they do with their turnover situation. Al Jefferson, I think he's a really poor pick if you're looking at picking him this season. That just doesn't make any sense. People will draft him, absolutely no doubt. He will get drafted by people. Ish Smith's got an ADP of 98 on ESPN. So dumb picks will get made, no doubt. Al Jefferson will be one that's not a great one to me. Much in the vein of Cody Zeller and Gaz Harris, Aaron Gordon had turnovers as his most productive category last season. That will absolutely change this season. I'm not concerned about that. Miles Turner, the same. The pencil, Harrison Barnes, his most productive category was turnovers. That will change this season as well. But it is worth noting, if you look at his overall 9-cat ranking, it will be a lot higher, a lot higher than his 8-cat ranking, because it is his best category. He comes in as a 120th ranked guy in 9-cat when he's like 150th, I believe, in 8-cat rankings. I think that he does have a step forward this year. Courtney Lee, he is one of those ones like Marvin Williams that just every season, it's just turnovers is what is inflating his ranking, and that means he's not. He will go to New York and he'll play big minutes, but he played big minutes in Memphis, he played big minutes in Charlotte, and he's barely a guy that's a top 150 player, and he is top 150 because his turnovers bumped him into that realm. He's not someone that I want to grab at that last portion of the draft. Ed Davis, a guy that you wouldn't even really consider in 8-cat leagues, he takes a massive jump forward for turnovers. Jose Calderon, we won't need to really pay attention to him this season. Willie Cauley-Stein and Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. Hollis-Jefferson, I think, is going to be a massive breakout player this season, and it's got nothing to do with his turnover, so I'm not too concerned there. Willie Cauley-Stein, I don't know what to make of Cauley-Stein. I don't know how many minutes he's going to get. I'm not convinced he's getting 30 minutes, and by not convinced, I mean I don't think he is. We heard Dave Yeager on with Zach Lowe the other day, talking about playing Omri Caspi at the 4, talking about playing Matt Barnes at the 4, gushing about Skal Labissiere, about how much he loves getting Skal out there. Now, he said, this is what he said, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote. He says, I probably don't expect Skal to be an all-star this year. Like, no shit for a start, but the fact that no one would have even considered, oh yeah, Skal maybe be an all-star, but the fact that he even put that in to say, oh look, just so you don't get confused, I don't think he's going to be an all-star. Like, nobody thought that. Yeah, you go. No, but Dave, we didn't think that Skal was going to be an all-star, but you must love him this much, and he must be showing some great stuff that you had to throw that qualifier out there. It was a weird sentence to me to throw out there about, he's not going to be an all-star. Like, no shit. No, not one person would have gone on and said, Yeager loves Labissiere, all-star. Nobody would have said that. But the fact that he went out and said that makes me think, shit, he loves this guy, and this guy is throwing out some big performances. And that really concerns me with Willie Cauley-Stein. I don't think Papagiannis is going to have any impact whatsoever. Costa Koufos is going to be buried. But Labissiere, real chance to play the 4 and to play some significant minutes there. So that's really going to have an impact on Willie Cauley-Stein, I think. Andre Iguodala and Danny Green, 2 players whose most of their value came from turnovers. Green, I think, has a real bounce back, but you'll hear talk of him. He was a top 25 guy last season, then dropped to outside the top 120. Yeah, he was top 25 because the turnovers were low as well. Yeah, he got a lot of threes, and he had great percentages, and he got steals and blocks, but the turnovers elevated him a lot, and they're going to continue to elevate him. Again, just don't pay attention. Brandon Bass was a top 150 player last year. Turnovers, massive. Yeah, my boy Kelly Olynyk, another thing. Now I think that Olynyk's going to get more minutes this season, hopefully, and hopefully play a bigger role. And he is really, tremendous upside. So I do like what Kelly Olynyk can do, but his rank last year was heavily influenced by turnovers. Jared Dudley, he's not going to be a sexy target, but Alan Crabb is a player that his 9-cat and 8-cat rankings were very different last season because he didn't average any turnovers. And there was times when, we have to add Crabb. He's getting 27 minutes a night, cool, but he does nothing. He does nothing from a fantasy point of view. He hits threes, his percentages are okay, but their volume is pretty low. He doesn't score enough. Rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks, forget about all those categories. He gives you nothing there, and his just value is buoyed by turnovers. And as I mentioned, and I'll say it until I'm blue in the face or until someone calls me out for being a dick, the best way to get no turnovers is not to play anybody. And just Crabb doesn't do enough for me. He won't be a 150 target for me at all. Despite signing the new contract, he's actually got more competition for minutes this year than what he did last year. Thabo Cephalosha and TJ Warren round out the top 150 of players who they wouldn't be in the top 150 if turnovers were not counted. I'll run through the guys that have turnovers as their second most productive category, and there's some interesting names here. Dirk Nowitzki and Jay Crowder. So they get big bumps. Now, I think Crowder found himself inside the top 40 in a 9-cat situation. I just wouldn't take him in that spot, again, because turnovers are influencing a lot of what he does, and he just doesn't feel like a top 40 guy. Same with Dirk. I really like Dirk, but to me, that is a big influence. Serge Ibaka and JJ Redick, I think you'll see that not be the case for Ibaka this season as he gets some of his other numbers back up. Redick, that's pretty common sense. He gives you nice percentages and good threes, but turnovers are still his second biggest thing. And Nikola Jokic, he was second. Now, I love Jokic. You've heard me talk about him, and I've talked about him a lot this year. And when I say that he's got top 12 upside, that's 8-cat upside. That's nothing to do with his turnovers. If you turn on turnovers, then he becomes a top 10 prospect in 35 minutes. He's not going to get 35 minutes. We don't know where he's going to be, and he is going to be a real interesting guy. When you see his projections come out this season, you might think that we're on crack, but there's definitely there's massive risk associated with taking Nikola Jokic, and I would never take him at the spot where his projection comes out. I'd be looking around later because we just don't know what Michael Malone is going to do with that front court rotation. George Hill, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Nikola Mirotic, all guys that I like. Their second best category was turnovers, so they get bumps in 9-cat formats as well, or 9-cat rankings. And again, it's something that I'll probably let those guys slide. Mirotic, not so much. I think he takes a bit of a jump forward, and I think George Hill does to a degree, but the way that Utah is set up is very similar to Indiana with ball handling wings. Not quite as dominant as what Paul George is, or ball dominant as what Monte Ellis is, but Rod Hood and Gordie Hayward, they handle the ball a fair bit. So I think we'll see an improved George Hill, and turnovers probably won't be his second category, but he's not going to be the 2014-15 George Hill when he ran everything for the Pacers. J.R. Smith, Zach Randolph, Wes Matthews all have their second best category as turnovers. Omri Caspi, Amir Johnson, Al-Farouq Aminu, Matt Barnes, Jared Sullinger, and Jabari Parker all have their second best category as turnovers. Damari Carroll, PJ Tucker, Kyle Korver, Tristan Thompson, Zaza Pachulia, Marcus Morris, Jared Bayless, Steve Adams, Mike Beasley, Cole Aldrich, Tony Allen, and Mirza Teletovic. That is the run of guys whose best category or second best category is the turnover category. And I think I've gone through it ad nauseum as to what my thoughts are on using that as a ranking system, because it does, to me, throw things off completely. I hope all that made sense, talking about ranks and talking about my opinions on ranks and how they can be misused or misinterpreted. And your best off is using customizable projections. And that's not just me saying go and check out a customizable projections at Basketball Monster, because that is clearly the best way to me of being able to set up your draft and build your team the exact way that you want to build them. And grab the guys when the value is coming off the board, and don't be afraid of players at different spots in the draft, and don't be tied to I'm at pick 70, this guy's ranked 85th, I'm not sure if I should do it. Don't be beholden to those sort of numbers. Now let's get into your questions. I reckon I've probably answered some of these. All right, John Murphy. If you are in a punting situation and someone who excels in the category you are punting falls several rounds below your no punt rankings, do you snatch them up to trade because of their eventual value to the rest of the league, or do you stick to your punt rankings? I'm not talking about 10 or even 20 slots, but 40 or 50 slots beyond where you think they should go. Example might be if Gallinari drops while you're punting free throw percentage, or Valanciunas if you're punting field goal percentage. Well, I mentioned this before. If they're dropping 40 spots What makes you think that you can trade them back to the league? Because if the league valued them 40 spots higher, they would have drafted them 40 spots higher. So drafting them just because I want to trade them back to the league at their actual value, it's not going to work, because if they wanted them, they would have picked them. In saying that, if I'm punting free throw percentage, it's a big category for Gallinari. But I'm not avoiding him because he has good free throw percentage. I might need his potential 20 points a game. I might need his 2 threes a game. I might need his rebounds and his steals. I might need those things. And they might actually fit in with what I need to do. So as I've said plenty of times, and people do disagree with me, the definition of punting is not getting worse in a category. It is literally ignoring that category. You punt 2 categories in a 9-cat league, you are now playing in a 7-cat league. That is how you should be approaching the draft. I am building 7 categories. I am not deliberately getting worse in a category. You should not be avoiding someone who is good in a category you're punting. You should be looking at where are their strengths. Think positive, people. Be positive. The power of positivity. Look at what the person does well. Look at what their good categories are. Where can they help you? Can they help you? Is Gallinari's 18 points or 20 points? That's really valuable. Yeah, my free throw percentage is sitting at 69% and he's an 85 guy on 8 attempts. Huge. But where else am I getting 20 points from at this point in the draft? Same with Valanciunas. Oh, he gives me 10 rebounds. He might give me a block and a half. He might give me 18 points, plus he gives me solid free throw percentage. Oh yeah, but I've punted field goal percentage. Oh well. And on Basketball Monster, you can toggle that off. You can see where their value lies in that situation. But you know, how do their positives help me? How do the remaining positives help what I do? Joseph Diffenbach says, in a 12-team league for either roto or head-to-head, what would be your preferred draft slot? How many rounds ahead of ADP would you reach for a player you really wanted, since most ADPs and ranks are more like guidelines and gospel? That's exactly what I was just trying to say. ADPs and ranks, I've got no problem reaching 2 rounds. If someone's got an ADP of 90 and I'm sitting at 70, fine. If someone's got an ADP of 90 and you've got pick 90 and you wait till pick 90, you'll be disappointed. If there's someone that I would go, I've got this guy ranked as the 40th ranked player, he's got an ADP of 90, I've got to have him. I'll take him at 70. I'll take him at 65 if I need to, because I'm still getting value on what I project him to come out as. He fits what I need to do, and I've got the guy. Rather than wait and wait and wait, and then me not get a guy who could return tremendous value. Happy with going ahead of that. Preferred draft slot. I think the top 3 is still the spot you want to go, but after that, I actually like going 9 through 12 better than the mid-ranges, because the way that all the value is squished up between that 6 to 12 range, then if you pick, say, 11 or 12, you get the guys at 13 and 14. And the guys at 13 and 14, based on our current projections, are a lot more productive than the guys at, say, 17 and 18, which you would get if you pick 6. You pick 6, you pick 15, 16, that middle range there. You actually get more combined value by picking 11 and 14. Because the guys sitting at 13 and 14 are closer to that top 12 than the guys after that. Obviously, but there's a bigger gap between those players. So I would rather be picking at the end of the first round, getting 12, 13, 11, 14, 10, 15, that sort of range, than going 6, 18 or 6, 19, whatever the combination is. Because I think you get return more value from those 10, 11, even 9 spots than you do by getting 5, 6, 7, 8. Joshua Hay says, if we're saying 6 to 12 are roughly interchangeable, can the same be said for 1 to 6? No. I mentioned that before. No, if I give you the numbers, and this is just their pure ranking value, number 1 is at 1.44. Number 2, and I'm not revealing who these are yet because it waits till our projections come out. Number 1 is 1.44. Number 1 is 1.32. Number 3 is 1.09. It's a big drop between 1 and 3. Number 4 is 1.00. Number 5 is 0.93. Number 6 is 0.83. So we've got differences of 0.12, of 0.23, of 0.09, of 0.07, of 0.1. Then the next gaps are 0.03, 0.03, 0.01, 0, 0.02, 0. So the gaps between those first few guys are significant. The gaps between the back end of the first round, interchangeable. You can take whoever you want out of those guys. You basically, out of those last 6 players or 7 players, if you're looking at just how the value works, just take who you want, take who you believe in, take how you want to build your team. That's the only way to do it. But those first few ones, there's definite differences between those guys. He also says, where are you seeing AD this year? 4, 5, 6? Yes. Now, there is risk associated with it, definitely. People are very down on Anthony Davis. You probably won't need to take him 4, 5, 6. I think that he is that sort of player who's got number one upside. We know that he's got number one upside because he's done it before. Would I take him at 4, 5, 6? I wouldn't take him at 4. I probably wouldn't at 5. I'll really look at it at 6. But I think that if you're sitting in the 9 range, you're going to have so many guys. I think you're going to have a choice between Davis, you're going to have Chris Paul, you're going to have LeBron, you're going to have DeMarcus Cousins at pick 9 potentially. You're going to have a great selection. And yeah, you know what? Davis might get injured again. So might Karl Anthony Towns. So might James Harden. And Davis has been injured a lot, yes. I know that, but he also has his maximum games played is 69, I believe, or 68, but his minimum is also 61. So it's not like he's missed a whole season. He's missed a lot of little pissy things. I understand that. I've got, and it's just a gut feel, I've got pretty good feeling about Davis for this season. I think that he plays 75 games. If I had to, and it's, you know, when we look at the projections that we do, I have to be sort of conservative with things and go that, you know, his track record doesn't say that, but I think that he can actually get to that. I think that he puts in a monster season. And if I'm picking at the back end of the first round, I'm actually okay with doing it. Now, if I'm in, say, three drafts, I wouldn't be investing in Davis in the first round in every one. I'd like to diversify a little bit, but I think that he can be a very, very good pick at that back end of the first round. Eric Spiropoulos says, hey Josh, can you give us a couple of under-the-radar big men who could have big seasons? Now, I don't know under the radar because it's hard for me to judge what everyone's radar is. I've got 4 guys down here who I think can be surprise packets. I think Gorgie Dieng can be a really big player this year. It all depends on what Thibodeau does. We don't know what Thibodeau is going to do. At this point, you'd have to think that he is going to be playing the bulk of the minutes at power forward and is a real chance to get to 35 minutes. But Thibodeau could also say, nah, let's run Towns and Aldridge for big chunks and play Dieng 28 minutes. And that puts Dieng still in the top 60 conversation. But if he gets 35 minutes, he's a top 30 type of player. I think you'll find his ADP is much lower than that. So I think he's a great option. Clint Capella in a punt free throw situation is top 20 upside, and you are not going to have to take Clint Capella there. People will say, oh, you know, he's unproven. He fouls a lot. He is the Rockets' only hope at center. They have to go with him. They have got nobody. He is a tremendous defender. He's a really good shot blocker. He played out of position last season, so a lot of his stats are deflated because he played away from the basket. When he played without Dwight Howard, his numbers were right back up to what we saw through his rookie season. I think he is going to be a tremendous punt free throw option, but he's also going to obliterate your free throw percentage, and that's going to be a concern. Andy Bogut. Injuries are a real worry, but you can get him in the last couple of rounds, and I think that he's got top 80 upside with his field goal percentage, blocks, rebounds, and assists for a center. He'll play way more minutes than he did in Golden State. He'll get more touches than he did in Golden State as well. I think he's a big one, and Cody Zeller is the guy I talked about earlier. I think that he's going to have a decent season. You can probably get him in the last round of a draft, and he should be able to have a chance at returning top 100 value, I think. VP says, what is the hardest and riskiest position to get in a roto league? It has to be power forward and center. There's so many injury-prone power forwards and centers. Well, you've just answered your own question, Vivek, so I'm not sure what I'm saying there. Anything's risky. Yeah, there are a lot of injury-prone centers. Chris Paul had been someone who's classified injury-prone before the last couple of seasons. Eric Bledsoe is injury-prone. Anyone can be. People have stupidly said that Russell Westbrook is injury-prone. There are plenty of bigs who are injury-prone. Injury prone is such a bullshit term to me because who knows who gets hurt. Damian Lillard was an Iron Man until he missed 10 games last season. And if Damian Lillard gets injured again this season, I don't know about Lillard, he's injury prone. He's missed 10 games the last 2 years. The narrative changes very quickly. I'm not overly worried about what a hardest or riskiest position is to get. People will be like, oh, you can get Towns, he played 82 games, he's the most reliable. It's one season. Who knows what Towns is going to do this season? Who knows if he's going to get hurt? Who knows if he's going to get nicked up? Great start. You know who also played 82 games in their first 3 seasons in the NBA? Who everybody hates because he's injury prone? Brook Lopez. 82 games the first 3 years of his NBA career. And now, I can't draft him. Injury prone. the narrative changes way too quickly. But in general, yes, VP, big man, because you're not supposed to be 7 foot tall and be that athletic and run and jump and bounce and all that sort of stuff. So yes, they do tend to be more injury prone. Last question comes from Dave Feldman. Let's talk the pencil, Harrison Barnes. What's his absolute upside this season and worst case scenario? Worst case scenario, he's just unownable. He finishes outside the top 150. I really cannot see that happening. I think he's got a chance to be a top 80 player. I don't think he gets there. I think that he's going to be a guy that surprises people this year. He might up his assist rate. I think he scores at a decent amount. His percentages might take a bit of a hit, but they're not going to be a terrible hit. I think they're going to be a pretty decent, solid percentage-wise. He'll score, he'll get some rebounds. He's got to get his steals up. His defense is poor. That limits his upside. 80 might be pushing it. Worst case scenario, he's outside the top 150. All right, that's it. We're done today, guys. We're going to have a lot of podcasts coming this week with some pretty exciting guests happening. I'm going to be having Nate Duncan on later in the week, and then we're going to be starting the team preview shows on Thursday Australian time, Wednesday night US time. We're going to be kicking it off with the Chicago Bulls with Sean Hyken from NBC Sports. We'll be doing the Chicago Bulls team preview podcast starting on Thursday. Nate will be here on Wednesday, and tomorrow's podcast, I'm still debating what I'm going to do. I've got a few topics up my sleeve, so we'll be doing another show for tomorrow. Again, don't forget, Basketball Monster, 1st of September, our projections are coming out, and then myself and Kyle will be doing an AMA on the Reddit Fantasy Basketball subreddit on Thursday once the projections come out, asking your questions, taking your criticisms, I'm sure, for any of the numbers that we've got there. And again, don't get too overly worked up about ranks and where people come in the ranks. It's all about projections and how a player fits your team. We are done for today's podcast, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.